This timeline covers 3.3 million years, beginning with the first stone tools at Lomekwi. On the right, a microscopic sliver marks the advent of writing. Zooming in reveals that over 99% of human existence occurred without a single written document. Even within that 1%, the historical record carries heavy biases. Literacy was largely restricted to elite classes, aristocrats, kings, and court bureaucrats. Their surviving texts naturally prioritize their own political interests and worldview, almost entirely ignoring the daily realities of the common populace. Yanking artifact out of the ground strictly for its aesthetic or monetary value destroys the physical evidence around it. By scrambling the distinct layers of dirt, you permanently erase the context that tells us how, when, and by whom the object was actually used. To understand the billions of people left out of the written record, we must rely on their material culture. The physical remnants they left in the soil serve as the most objective evidence we have to reconstruct their lifeways. The earliest documented attempt to systematically unearth the past took place around 550 BC. King Nabonidus of Babylon located the foundation deposits of a temple built 1,500 years before his reign, actively attempting to date the artifacts and restore the sanctuary. Centuries later, scholars during the Chinese Song Dynasty and the European Renaissance embraced antiquarianism. They collected ancient bronze inscriptions and Greco-Roman statues, but their efforts were largely driven by philosophical curiosity and social prestige, rather than scientific rigor. By the 18th century, explorers were digging into the ash-covered Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Their approach was incredibly reckless. Entire architectural environments were obliterated solely to extract pristine frescoes and intact sculptures for display. Digging for spectacular treasures without recording the surrounding data effectively erases a site. The object may survive on a shelf, but the historical information it contained in the ground is permanently destroyed. This diagram illustrates stratigraphy, a principle adopted from geology in the 19th century. It shows that deeper layers of Earth generally represent successively older periods of time. Artifacts embedded in the lower strata clearly belong to older cultures than those sitting closer to the surface. Even with this new understanding, early interventions at monumental sites like Stonehenge required aggressive earth-moving. Teams utilized heavy lifting equipment and invasive trenching methods to navigate the massive stones before delicate preservation protocols were developed. The methodology tightened significantly in the 1920s when researchers introduced the grid system. Excavators were now required to meticulously map, catalog, and index every single item exactly where it was found within a clearly defined square. Researchers like Flinders Petrie realized that the most useful data didn't come from rare treasures. By analyzing the stylistic evolution of mundane broken pottery fragments, they established a reliable method to date specific layers of Earth. By prioritizing fragmented ceramics and soil composition over gold, the field built a chronological sequence. Researchers finally possessed a structured, scientific timeline to map human history. Today, archaeologists operate under the premise that physical excavation is an inherently destructive act. Once you dig up a site, it can never be reconstructed. Because of this, breaking ground is now the absolute last resort. Before reaching for a trowel, researchers deploy remote sensing technology like LiDAR. By bouncing laser pulses from aircraft, they can strip away dense vegetation to map the precise topography of ancient settlements completely hidden beneath the canopy. On the ground, geophysical surveys use magnetometers and ground-penetrating radar to measure microscopic deviations in the Earth's magnetic field. This locates buried kilns, defensive ditches, and stone walls under the topsoil without disturbing a single stone. When an excavation is finally authorized, the work is incredibly surgical. Teams operate millimeter by millimeter, recording the exact three-dimensional horizontal and vertical coordinates of every artifact and soil discoloration. The real analysis happens post-excavation. Through archaeometry, scientists use stable isotope analysis and mass spectrometry on tiny fragments of bone and plant matter to decode specific dietary habits and geographic origins. Modern archaeology extracts massive societal-level data from microscopic evidence, effectively removing the need to cut broad, destructive trenches across the landscape. A vast majority of the profession is now engaged in cultural resource management. Instead of seeking untouched ruins, these teams focus on identifying and preserving threatened heritage sites on public and private land, before they are bulldozed for modern development. The physical record also faces deliberate, active threats. Organized looters continue to illegally rip artifacts from the ground to supply the illicit antiquities trade, permanently denying descendant populations the opportunity to understand their own past. Anthropogenic climate change presents an equally severe threat. Rising temperatures are melting glaciers and ice patches, exposing perfectly preserved organic materials. But the moment these artifacts touch the open, warmer air, they begin rapidly and irreversibly degrading. Ethically, the field is confronting its own history of extraction. Guided by legislation like the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, archaeologists now actively collaborate with indigenous groups to return and respectfully rebury ancestral remains, rather than storing them in museum archives. This collaborative framework is essential for combating historical erasure. Researchers work alongside descendant communities to identify and excavate historically marginalized locations, like the unmarked burial grounds of the enslaved across the African diaspora. To counter the sheer scale of threatened sites, researchers are deploying artificial intelligence. AI models scan thousands of satellite images to identify subtle, human-made anomalies, like these newly discovered Nazca geoglyphs, spotting physical evidence that would take surveyors decades to map manually. The ultimate objective is no longer to hoard beautiful objects in glass cases. It is to ethically protect, decode, and share the fragile material record, piecing together the unwritten identity of humanity.